Good evening, I'm David Nicholas, and next year on CMU Public Television, we visit with a third-term Michigan lawmaker. Representative Charles Brunner joins me next on Capitol Report.
Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
In November, my guest this week won a re-election, we should say, to a third term in the Michigan House. In the 96th District, the city of Bay City, portions of Bay County. We say congratulations to Representative Charles Brunner and welcome back to Capitol Report.
Well, thank you, David. Always happy to come back to my alma mater.
As we sit down today, the vote now 5 days out on Proposal 1, and as folks are joining us then for this conversation, by that point the ballots will be in the counting process. I wanted to begin looking at this first from two perspectives. The measure passes. Let's go from that standpoint first and tell us what the short-term and the long-term benefits and potential drawbacks will be, because obviously it remains somewhat of a back-and-forth debate.
Sure, David, and that's a very good question, and it's a difficult one for folks. I mean, it's in their hands, and people say to me, well, why did we sent you to Lansing to make those tough decisions. At the end of the day, I'm not on transportation, I'm not on appropriations. It was the only plan that I was presented at 4 in the morning on the last day of lame duck session. We all know the roads are bad and getting worse in the state of Michigan. We've had 2 horrendous winters that have just really raised Cain with the roads across the state. It's become a priority of the governor and the legislature to do something with the roads. So people ask me, well, what about Proposal 1? Do you, well, let me answer the question I brought up earlier. Again, it was the only proposal that I was presented. So people ask me, do you support it? And I say, yes, personally I support it, but it's in your hands. The main thing I want is I want people to understand what Proposal 1 is. And just very quickly, if I may, I know you've had some folks on here that have explained it, but from my perspective and what I voted on, I just want to very quickly summarize based on a couple questions I received from constituents. One is, well, if it was just for transportation, I would support it. Well, in order to do that, we currently have a 6-cent tax on gasoline that goes to schools, goes to local government. We couldn't just make that go away because it would put a tremendous hole in their budgets. So in order to take that 6 cents off, that amount of money that's generated that goes to schools and local governments had to be shifted somewhere. That's where the 1% sales tax comes in. That 1% sales tax will generate the money, and actually some additional money for schools and local governments. I take offense when I see the ad that says special interests, especially being a retired school teacher. This would actually put some more money into schools and local governments who have taken hits for the last 10 to 15 years. So once that 6 cents goes away, the current 19 cents then shifts and becomes a wholesale price or a percentage on the wholesale price of the gasoline. And there are some other things that are happening as well. But those are the 2 major concerns and 2 things that folks are actually taking a look at in this ballot initiative. So once that happens, we'll see. It's supposed to generate somewhere between $1.2 billion and $1.4 billion, the additional money that's going to be raised by shifting that to a percentage of the wholesale. There are some other things as well. For instance, registration of vehicles will no longer be depreciated. It'll basically, once you purchase a vehicle, that registration amount will stay the same. I believe there's some penalties so there's some increase in revenues from large trucks and some increased registration on large trucks as well. So, but all of that, there is actually a package of 10 bills that have been signed, that have been passed by the House and the Senate with a 2/3 vote. And they have been signed by the governor, but none of that takes effect unless we have this 1% sales tax increase.
Why, and I've asked this question of every guest so far this season in the run-up to this, why in that 6% sales tax, and again, don't take offense as a former teacher, but it was it was a tax on gas. It was the sales tax on gas. Why were we in a system where that was going anywhere but to the roads? I would see funding schools here, funding local governments here,
Sure.
and that, which seems very self-explanatory, and nobody's been able to give me a date that went into effect, or how a prior legislature, whether it was Democrat or Republican majority, whether it was a Democrat or Republican
Sure.
in the governor's seat in Lansing, how we got to the point where we then found ourselves in to me, what essentially came down to as much a structural problem as, in the end, this funding shortfall problem.
Sure, sure. And that's a very good question, and I've never been asked that question. And I could certainly research that and get back with you as far as when it happened. I could only speculate that at some point they need some additional money for schools, and maybe the price of gas was low, and that was one of the choices that the legislature had. Was to put that tax on gasoline. I know, it makes no sense. Why would tax on gasoline go to schools and local governments? Local governments, possibly I could see maybe to be used for some of the local streets. But why that money would be earmarked for schools on the gas tax, I don't have that history.
Okay, back to the original question, and the
Sure.
measure is, as we get to the run-up and the votes are being counted, the measure is defeated. Same question, short-term and long-term. Depending on where the vote is at the end of the day on May 5th.
Well, a couple things, if I may. One is we just voted on a budget in the House of Representatives. Transportation funding, I'm not on appropriations, so I'm not totally sure where that was at. And believe it or not, with the budget for the state of Michigan, we got two bills we vote on, which in my mind is crazy. We vote on the education budget, which is somewhere between 15 and 20 billion, and the rest of the state budget for all the departments and everything else that the state does, which is somewhere around 35 billion. So
people don't like omnibus bills when they're talked about in Washington. Should we be doing this differently here?
I think we should, because there may be some, it's like, it's all or nothing. So there may be some things in the budget that you like, some things that you don't like. So you've got this decision. You vote on the whole thing, or you vote against it if you don't get what you want. When I was on the city commission for the city of Bay City, it was broken down into 8 or 9 components. So there may be some budgets that you agree with, or some I actually vetoed a measure because they didn't have appropriate funding for public safety. For instance, for the city of Bay City. So that's the way it works, and we actually voted just this past week on both budgets. So getting back
I didn't
to
mean
the
to
original
interrupt.
question.
It was the idea then, you said short-term, long-term, and you said so the budget bills that have just been passed, and then where do we potentially stand because of the two components of that budget, transportation funding,
Sure,
and
sure.
so if by the end of the day, as people are tuning into our conversation now, we don't know, but by end of the evening there might be word. If the measure's defeated, what happens short-term,
Okay,
long-term?
and that's a very good question. I knew that's where you're going because we had talked earlier. But the way the system works is we passed a House budget, okay, which I voted against both pieces of the budget, by the way. And the Senate passed their budget. I don't know if the full Senate has passed it yet. I know it passed out of committee, I believe. And of course, the governor proposed his budget in February. At this point, and there's some other things that play into this. So at this point, the budget is not finalized. We don't vote on the budget. In the previous 4 years that I've been here, we voted on the budget approximately May 30th, and it's been done the first week in June. Now, when the Democrats, when there was partial control of Republicans and Democrats, they went right up until September 30th because our fiscal year starts October 1st, rather, and that's when the budget starts. So the budgets that are passed right now have some, to my knowledge, have some big differences. I think that they're going to sit for a couple reasons and will probably change drastically because of a couple things that are coming up. One is the Revenue Estimating Conference, which predicts the income for the state of Michigan. About a year ago, we were looking at a budget surplus. But as time went on, the economy didn't improve like it was supposed to. We had some some tax credits that had to be paid off. There were a number of things going on that actually brought the revenue for the state down to the point where we're actually looking at a budget shortfall. But I think one of the big things that's going to really play into the budget is Proposal 1. Now, if it passes, then I expect certainly to see the transportation budgets increase and possibly some other as well, such as education, some of the other things that if that 1% revenue is raised and goes to, as I mentioned earlier, education and local governments and restoration of their income tax credit and some of the other things that are part of that package, then that's going to affect the budget tremendously. So I fully expect that if it passes, that will change, certainly. If it doesn't pass, you know, government is all about priorities and what you really want to fund, although with the state of Michigan, and we had this conversation earlier, there isn't a lot in the $50 billion plus budget for the state of Michigan that can be shifted around. It just so happens that local government and education are two that can be. And the reason I say that is a large percentage of the state budget is federal funding. All of that money has to go to certain programs. You can't take that and put it into the roads. So if Proposal 1 fails, then I got a feeling, strong feeling, that since roads have become a priority, that roads will be funded, but it's going to be at the expense of some other budgets. There was a Bolger plan that people keep referring to, the speaker of the last session, that people keep referring to, that was going to take the money. His plan was to take the money from schools and local governments and backfill as the economy increases, and there were going to be some things that it was a rather complicated budget.
Passed the House, didn't pass the Senate. Senate plan passed, but didn't get passed by the House. And then now, as you said, the proposal that came that eventually has become Proposal 1. Coming up then in the lame duck and the vote coming up. That's
correct, partially. The House did pass a road funding budget that would have generated $500 million, parts of which I voted for. I believe it was a 12-bill package that included some fees for penalties for large trucks, increased registration. It dealt with registration on vehicles. There might have been some increases there. It did the wholesale shift. Would have generated $500 million. Once that got sent down to the Senate, that's all they could come up with, and they couldn't pass it out of the full Senate. That's all they could come up with in committee was increased taxes on gasoline, which kind of fell apart because nobody on that end supported it. So that's why this proposal from leadership on both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, both ends of the building, Senate and the House, and the governor, that's the best they could come up with was the proposal that's before the public right now. It is a tax increase at the end of the day, and there are some people that are vehemently opposed to tax increases, and so I certainly understand that position. But Speaker Bolger did have another plan that included these cuts to other programs to fund the roads, and that's why I say it's a matter of priorities to get things done. If whoever the party is that's in leadership has some priorities and they can focus on those, there is a possibility of shifting money around, not a lot though, to get some things done.
There is technically then no plan B.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
You alluded to how the money would be, but there right now is because those that have come out in support basically are guests earlier said, we don't want to necessarily present a plan B because we don't want to assume that it won't pass.
Sure.
As a member of the State House Committee on Local Governments and with your background there, is the present system when it comes to funding local municipalities a good one? Should there be more local control? That's part of all this, the money that goes there, and we've seen, local governments certainly have seen the revenue sharings go up and down through these cycles, just the same as we've seen, again, back to that 1963 Constitution, dictates the budget, dictates how much flexible money there is. So local governments, municipalities have seen this go up and down substantially. Is there a better way? Should there be some shift in the way taxes are applied one way or another so that local governments themselves could essentially be more on their own and not be quite as reliant on Lansing?
And that's a very fair question. I think there has to be a better way. But, you know, given the economy, I mean, when I first got involved in local government, it's about 14, 15 years ago now. It came in right after the economy really started slowing in the year 2000, 2001. I believe that was the advent of the some problems with the banks and some of the investor-owned companies that dealt with IT and some of those things. And the economy started slipping. And so for 15 years that I've been involved with government, we've done nothing but cut, 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 cut. And so it's very challenging to generate the revenues. Of course, decreasing property values, and now we're in a situation, and this started about the year 2000, maybe a little bit before, where we give business tremendous tax breaks with the idea that they're going to bring in jobs, and we found out in some cases, certainly that materializes. When I was on the city government, I only voted against one tax break, and that was a business that wanted to pay 0 taxes. Most of the time, it's a 50% recovery process. So I think you bring up a valid point. I think it's something that is definitely worth looking at. I don't have any, well, actually, when I was at the city of Bay City and I first became mayor, I had everything on the table, tried to bring everybody together, all the union folks and all the administration, and say, let's take a look at every possibility that we can do, given the fact that, you know, we've got 300 people to run the city of Bay City. We're in this together. What can we do to possibly generate some different funds, make some cuts, do whatever? And at the end of the day, you know, we're still, you know, the city relies, of course, on property tax revenues. With the declining property values, of course, that becomes a real problem. You know, business receiving tax breaks, which is the atmosphere. I'm not, it's a good thing, bad thing. It's the atmosphere we're operating in now, where, you know, and with the, and since I've been in Lansing, you know, the state has eliminated the Michigan business tax was a source of revenue. That could have gone to local governments, and I've got my ideas on what we could have done with that. But personal property tax, and there have been a number of other programs that have been created, again, all of which takes away from local government's tax base. City of Bay City went from 450 employees down to 300, made tremendous cuts in the budget, and still balanced the budget, but you know, tremendous infrastructure problems that the city has to deal with, road problems, a downsized police force, fight. As a matter of fact, they now have public safety, which means police officers also fight fires. That's not the best ideal situation, but it's basically dealing with, you know, all of the declining revenues for the city of Bay City. So I think, yeah, it's time to take a look at some of those things, because how far can we go? How much of a reduction can we have? I mean, there are 4 people in the Parks Department in the city of Bay City that take care of the grass and provide all those services. And so do we just not cut grass in the parks anymore? Do we stop picking up trash? Do we, you know, and once those kinds of things happen, I think people realize, geez, those are services that have to be paid for.
Here in 2015, we've reached a point statewide where 10% of the power generated is coming from renewables. That was the renewable portfolio standard that has been met. All the debate that was going on as to whether or not that would increase to a higher percentage in a later year. Now it is in the hands of lawmakers in Lansing for a rewrite of the energy policy. Looking at that issue then as a whole, your district includes the Karn-Weddock power plant. I think you can kind of almost speak to both sides, because there's also wind farms that are just east of you out into the
Sure.
into the Thumb. What do you think in terms of where we stand, energy policy, renewables versus the existing power plants, the distribution system, the state of that, as it were?
Well, there's a lot into the energy policy, and this is my 5th year on the Energy Committee, and we are at the point now where we have to make some very, very important decisions as far as energy policy for the state of Michigan. We have the same situation where Senator Knopf chairs the Energy Committee on the Senate end. Our chair is Eric Nesbitt. Eric has put in a number of bills, one of which we're debating right now. And that bill basically would take And currently, the way you can purchase energy, there's 90% that's regulated, and there's 10% that can go out and use and buy it from alternative energy suppliers. And currently, they're saving money. But one of the problems one of the things that concerns me a lot is we have aging coal plants, which you referred to. As a matter of fact, I don't think this is any secret that Consumers is closing the Weddock facility, and the Karn plant is going to remain, and they're making tremendous investments in that piece of their generating capacity based on increased EPA requirements. So we have these aging power plants, and I fear that if we don't have some regulation in power, that we won't have the commitment to replace these plants, and we want to make sure that we have the capacity to serve the customers in the state of Michigan. And I don't want to see us get into a situation where we, mainly as consumers in DTE, I want to see them invest in these new plants. So they need some rate stability. Now, that being said, the current bill that's before us that we're debating basically goes back to a fully regulated market. I think we need a combination, something that is a combination of a fully regulated market, but we need to do something for our major power users. Just the chairman and CEO, Mr. Liveris from Dow Chemical Company, just gave a speech. And the only thing that was filled with the Great Lakes Bay region legislators, both House and Senate. And he said, legislators, one of the things you can help us with is power. You know, we have in our Great Lakes Bay region the Hemlock Semiconductor plant, largest user of power in the state. So we have to look out for ratepayers. We have to watch to make sure that we have adequate power. I mean, there's predictions that we're gonna have some shortfalls starting as early as next year. We have these aging plants. We have major power users we have to look out for. And so that's one piece of it, is what are we going to do with regulation versus a deregulated market? You mentioned the renewable portfolio. We're on track for the 10%. The good news is windmills have come down significantly to the point where that generation is significant. The only problem with wind is, of course, the only time it's generating is when it blows. And if the wind isn't blowing during peak times when power is expensive, then it's not doing us any good. So that's part of the portfolio, is the renewable piece. I think we should increase it. I'm not sure what the number is. I think we need to have that discussion to see what the future looks like. I think solar is just coming into play. What are we going to do with solar energy? So I think we need to increase that number. I'm just not sure what the number is yet.
Are the people that are, and we only have just a few moments left,
Sure.
Are the people that are pushing for greater amounts of the renewable and don't want to see, and are definitely in the side that says, you know, we're not going to build any more coal plants. They're on the side of where some of the federal policies come down. Do they have a figure in mind? Are they back to the 25% by 2025 or 30% by 2025, some of those figures?
There was just legislation introduced that I believe was 20% by 22. And I'm willing to take a look at that. I know I want to do something with that. And also, by the way, before we end, I want to see something in there with energy optimization, which means, you know, the cheapest power, of course, is the power that doesn't get used. And a lot of folks in the state of Michigan, you know, have poorly insulated homes, windows, heating systems. I'd like to see that be a piece also. So as we look at this policy, it's very complicated.
Is that point, and maybe that's a good place almost to wrap up the discussion, is that something that's been left out to any great degree in terms of trying to get that incentive or help for those who can't do that, or greater incentives for those that want to, creating more efficiency and optimization, as you say?
Yeah.
Should that be a bigger portion of what we're discussing?
I would like to see it be a part of an overall energy package for the state of Michigan. So we have the stable rate market, we have the renewable portfolio, and energy optimization. In my mind, that's a good combination for moving us forward with energy policy.
Well, we appreciate all the time on these two very big issues. There's some things that we had to even leave on the table this time around. Perhaps we'll pick up that conversation
Absolutely.
yet in the days and weeks to come
Sure.
through our FM news coverage. But appreciate the time and attention. We'll see kind of in this time warp that we're in right now where the vote on Prop 1 goes forward, and obviously the work further on the budget. Thanks again for being here.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for your time and attention here on Capitol Report. We've been speaking with Charles Brunner. He is the Democratic representative for Michigan's 96th district. A reminder, this program will be repeated this coming Saturday at 6:30 and also a week from today at 5 a.m. as our series and season continues for a few more weeks now. And we, as always, appreciate you joining us. For all of us here at Capitol Report, I'm David Nicholas. Thanks again, and we'll talk again.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.